Imagine a crisp winter night in rural Ukraine, where the snow muffles every sound and families huddle by flickering hearths for warmth. But on Christmas Eve 1995, in the quiet village of Garmarnia, that fragile peace exploded into horror. A shadowy figure kicked open a door, shotgun blazing, turning a simple holiday gathering into a bloodbath. By dawn, an entire family lay in ashes, their home reduced to smoldering ruins. This was no random tragedy. It was the handiwork of Anatoly Onoprienko, a man who would become known as the Beast of Ukraine, confessing to 52 murders in a rampage that scarred a nation. His story begins not in flames, but in the cold indifference of a broken childhood, unfolding into one of the most chilling tales of serial violence in modern history. Born on July 25, 1959, in the rural village of Lasky in Zhytomyr Oblast, part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, Anatoly Yuryovich Onoprienko entered a world still healing from the scars of World War II. His father, Yuri Onoprienko, was a decorated veteran who had braved the brutal Eastern Front, fighting against Nazi invaders in battles that claimed millions of lives. Yuri returned home a hero, but the war had left him hardened, and he settled into the quiet toil of farming the fertile hills where pine forests whispered secrets to the wind. Anatoly's mother provided a fleeting sense of stability, but tragedy struck when he was only 4 years old. She died suddenly, leaving behind two sons, the teenage Valentin and the toddler Anatoly, who could barely comprehend the loss that would define his life. In the rigid, patriarchal structure of Soviet rural society, Yuri faced a difficult choice. Valentin, at 13, was old enough to contribute to the household, working the fields and sharing the burdens with his father and aunt and grandparents. But young Anatoly was seen as an extra mouth to feed, a complication in an already strained existence. He was passed to relatives at first, but soon surrendered to a state orphanage in Privitne Volyn Oblast, a stark institution meant to mold abandoned children into productive citizens of the communist state. The orphanage was a world of gray concrete walls, communal dormitories with thin blankets, rote education, and enforced labor that built not character, but resentment. For Anatoly, this abandonment was a wound that never healed. In later confessions, he would rage against his father for choosing Valentin over him, declaring, "That predetermined my destiny." He often cited a grim statistic: 70% of orphanage children ended up in prison, as if it were a prophecy he was doomed to fulfill. Life in the orphanage was a daily grind of isolation and discipline. Peers remembered him as withdrawn, intelligent in his studies, but prone to sudden outbursts of anger, like thunderclaps in a clear sky. By the age of 7, he claimed the voices began, whispers in the dark as he lay awake, staring at cracks in the ceiling, urging him toward violence. Whether these were hallucinations born of trauma, early signs of schizophrenia, or simply a child's imagination twisted by loneliness, they marked the beginning of his inner turmoil. Psychiatric records from the time are sparse, but he visited outpatient clinics sporadically, labeled with vague diagnoses that the Soviet system used to categorize anyone who didn't conform. He showed promise in forestry, attending a technical school where the scent of wood and earth might have offered solace, a path away from the shadows. Yet the wilderness called in darker ways, pulling him toward solitude rather than salvation. By his late teens, Anatoly had left the orphanage behind, drifting into the vast, unforgiving underbelly of Soviet society. He took odd jobs as a seaman on cargo ships plying the Black Sea, where the endless horizon and rocking waves amplified his isolation, perhaps feeding the voices that grew louder in his mind. He was married briefly to a woman named Ludmila, but the union dissolved quickly, leaving no children and few memories. Rumors of petty crimes swirled around him, thefts from ports, brawls in dockside bars, but nothing that hinted at the monster brewing within. In his early 20s, he hunted his first victim, a deer in the woods, shot and skinned with a precision that brought tears to his eyes, not from remorse, but from a strange, ephemeral sorrow that he claimed never returned when his targets became human. He would later say, "I had no love, no hatred, just indifference." But beneath that facade simmered a deep-seated fury. At his father for the betrayal, at society for parading the families he was denied, and at the world for orphaning him twice over. Homes, with their glowing windows and laughter inside, became symbols of everything he despised, taunts of a life he could never have. As the 1980s drew to a close, the Soviet Union teetered on collapse. Mikhail Gorbachev's perestroika opened cracks in the Iron Curtain, unleashing economic chaos, crime waves, and a loosening of borders that allowed shadows like Anatoly to slip through unnoticed. By 1989, at age 30, he had partnered with Sergei Foma Rozozhin, a small-time criminal with a penchant for quick scores. Together, they targeted isolated farmhouses in the Carpathian foothills, where valuables were stashed in lofts and screams echoed into empty valleys. Their first documented atrocity occurred on a crisp autumn night in the village of Bratkovich, near the Polish border. They broke into the home of a prosperous farming family, 2 adults and 5 children, ranging from toddlers to pre-teens. What began as a simple burglary spiraled into a nightmare when the father awoke. Panicked, they fired their pistols, dropping him first. The mother and children, stirred by the gunfire, were executed one by one, bullets to the head, bodies collapsing in pools of blood. Rozozhin later insisted Anatoly did most of the killing, his eyes vacant and cold. They looted cash, jewelry, and a radio before fleeing, leaving the house intact. This massacre of innocents was buried under layers of Soviet bureaucracy, dismissed as an isolated incident and left unsolved for years. Emboldened by the lack of pursuit, Anatoly struck out alone soon after. In another 1989 incident, he targeted a parked car in a remote wooded area where a family of 5 slept during a road trip, including an 11-year-old boy. Creeping up silently, shotgun in hand, he blasted through the windows, shattering glass and flesh in a hail of buckshot. Any survivors were finished with knife thrusts, their bodies doused in gasoline and set ablaze to erase the evidence. It was unintentional, he confessed later, the lie hanging heavy in the air. But I just wanted the car. But the truth was emerging. Families were his proxies for paternal betrayal, their unity a trigger for his rage. Rozozhin, horrified by the escalating savagery, disappeared from Anatoly's life. For the next 5 years, Anatoly lay dormant, wandering Ukraine's backroads, surviving on thefts and menial work. The voices, perhaps sated for a time, fell silent, or so it seemed. But as Ukraine gained independence in 1991 and plunged into post-Soviet turmoil, hyperinflation, mafia wars, and crumbling institutions, the beast stirred once more. The rampage reignited on Christmas Eve in Garmarnya. The Zytrenko family, father Oleg, 35, mother Tamara, 32, and their children, 8 and 10, were sharing modest gifts by the fire. Anatoly, bundled in a black coat, burst through the door, shotgun leveled. "Money, where's the money?" he bellowed. Oleg lunged in defense. A blast tore through his chest. Tamara tried to shield the children, but buckshot ripped her apart. The boy and girl fell next, tiny forms crumbling. Anatoly rummaged for valuables, 500 hryvnia and a gold chain, before splashing kerosene and igniting the home. Flames devoured everything, including the Christmas tree. Neighbors discovered the charred remains at dawn, attributing it to a tragic fire. Mere days later, near Lviv, he repeated the horror on another family of 4, parents and 2 teenagers, shot in their beds. A male witness, perhaps a neighbor drawn by the screams, was executed outside. The killings felt increasingly personal, each family a mirror of the one he never had. On New Year's, January 2, 1996, in the Irpin suburbs of Kyiv, he targeted a wooden dacha housing a father, mother, and 2 daughters aged 6 and 9. Gunshots pierced the night, fire consumed the evidence. A passerby caught in the wrong moment took a stray blast. The highways became his new domain. On January 6th, along the foggy Berdansk-Dneprovsk road, Anatoly posed as a hitchhiker. He flagged down Ukrainian Navy ensign Viktor Kasai, 28, in a battered Lada, shot to the temple, body dumped in a ditch. Next came taxi driver Nikolay Savitsky, ferrying cook Olena Kochergina, 42, both slumped over the wheel, brains splattered. A 4th victim, an unidentified trucker, met the same fate. 4 lives snuffed out in under an hour for a watch and loose change. January 17th brought him back to Bratkovich, the site of his 1989 debut. The Pilat family, father Mikhailo, 40, mother Hanna, 38, children Oksana, 17, Volodymyr, 14, and Sofia, 9, were preparing breakfast when the door splintered. Mikhailo charged, buckshot eviscerated him. Hanna's screams were silenced point blank. The children, hiding under beds, were dragged out and executed with chilling precision. Anatoly looted a stereo and cash, set the blaze, then spotted two witnesses, railroad worker Petro Konzela, 27, and pedestrian Ivan Zaharko, 56, attracted by the smoke. Both were gunned down instantly. 7 dead in minutes. The pace quickened. On January 30th in Fostiv, Kyiv Oblast, Olena Marusina, 28, her sons aged 5 and 7, and guest Viktor Zagronchny, 32, were shot in their kitchen before the house was torched. February 19th in Olevsk, Zhytomyr Oblast.